So we're getting out of the studio today and going on a road trip. This is the garage at CBC, and I'm meeting two very special guests. Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey,
Hi.
Nice to see you.
Emma?
Emma.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
This is Emma McIntosh. She's a reporter from the Narwhal.
Fatima.
Fatima, nice to meet you too.
Very nice to meet you.
And this is Fatima Syed. She's also from the Narwhal. Their reporting has been focused on where we're going today. I hear we're going on a little trip.
We're going to the OG.
The OG, the Ontario Greenbelt. We're going there to try to understand what it is and why it's so important.
It's all about land, right? And what we do with land.
Yeah, it's safe to say that we're a little bit obsessed with the Greenbelt.
We nicknamed it.
Okay, so we're gonna hop in the van right now,
Yes.
and we're gonna learn a little bit more about, I guess, like what the Greenbelt is, how difficult it is to get housing built, I mean in this province, but like anywhere in Canada. And you guys have two places that we're gonna see?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go ahead and hop in the van.
Let's
Yeah.
go.
Okay, we're gonna go
Let's
for a
get
drive
on the
after you
road.
guys.
So first we're going to Pickering, which is east of Toronto, and then we'll be going to Vaughan, which is north.
Okay, sounds good. Let's go.
I'm excited.
Okay, so hey, welcome to About That. And it occurs to me that some of you may be wondering, what is the Greenbelt exactly? The OG, the Ontario Greenbelt. So essentially, I mean, it's a huge tract of protected land, so protected by law in this province since it was like early 2000s or mid 2000s.
2005,
right?
yeah.
2005.
This is now the official plan. Already preserved, strips covering the Niagara Escarpment and the Oak Ridges Moraine. Add to that swaths of land on either side, and you get a belt stretching from Niagara Falls to Peterborough, a protected area larger than Prince Edward Island.
This will not shrink, is because the people of Ontario will jealously guard their Greenbelt.
And so comprised of, you know, like forest, farmland, wetlands, watershed. It kind of walls off a huge chunk of the Greater Toronto Area, and it's big.
It's humongous.
Right? 2 million acres big. Certainly bigger than like just about any Canadian city you could think of. Like, what to you makes this space unique, sets it apart from everything else?
I think that size is really part of it. This is one of the first large-scale environmental protection plans in Canada, which makes it really important. Especially after World War II, our cities were kind of exploding outwards, right?
Sprawl.
Sprawling outwards, all these neighborhoods in every direction. And the Greenbelt was kind of a recognition that we couldn't do that forever, that we actually needed to set aside some of those natural places, some of that farmland, so that we didn't accidentally use it all up.
So the big trade-off is, okay, the government wants to open land for housing. Great, I'd love to own a home. Really want that for me. But at what cost, right? What does this mean for the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years?
Well, so the government says that, sure, we're cutting out 7,400 acres of the Greenbelt and developing homes on it, but we're adding 9,400 acres elsewhere. And so, I mean, the government would say, net, that's a win, because you actually end up with a larger Greenbelt.
Yeah, you'd think that. But what land they're choosing matters. So they're taking out 15 little snippets of Greenbelt land from a bunch of different places. And what they're adding in comes from two other places. One of them is a set of urban river valleys. And those are all, if you think about the land that goes right up next to rivers and streams, where, you know, it might be flood prone anyway, you're not really going to build there, right? And those places were already on public land, already undevelopable.
Already protected in
already
some parts.
protected.
Right.
Yeah. And then the other set of land is coming from a little bit in the town of Erin, Ontario. And it's part of this landform called the Paris Galt Moraine, which is a rocky ridge. And the moraine is super important. A bunch of drinking water comes from there. But it was already protected from some types of development through other mechanisms. So we're losing 7,400 acres, and what we're gaining back wasn't really unprotected anyway.
Okay, so I think we're getting close to where we're going. Where are we going?
Well, we are headed to an area really close to the Dauphin Rouge Agricultural Preserve.
This is the most fertile, richest agricultural land in the entire country. It's got some, like, the farmland here and the food that grows here is so special. Years ago, like decades ago, there was an agreement to protect this land in perpetuity, like literally forever and ever and ever. The cities of Pickering, Ajax, and surrounding regions, you know, made an agreement with farmers that this land would only be used for agriculture, and that's the only purpose. But there's a lot of drama.
We will open up the Greenbelt, not all of it. We're going to open a big chunk of it up, and we're going to start building. I give you my commitment that anything that we look at on the Greenbelt will be replaced. So there'll still be the equal amount of Greenbelt. Unequivocally, we won't touch the Greenbelt. Unlike other governments that don't listen to people, I've heard it loud and clear. People don't want me touching the Greenbelt. I'm not touching the Greenbelt. I would talk to the Minister of Environment about that, but we're putting together a good plan for the environment. We have a housing crisis today that we didn't have 4 years ago. We are going to make sure we get housing built.
Okay, I think we're getting close. Probably get our jackets on.
I'm excited.
Okay.
Let's go.
And so this is it. This is Dauphin Creek.
This is the famous Duffin's Creek,
Welcome to the
Okay, just watch your
Greenbelt.
step down here.
the site of many battles over development on Ontario. This is hallowed ground.
And so here you can see, I mean, it's mostly frozen over.
Yeah, but in the springtime, this is all green and gushing. And,
Of course. You mentioned farming. I don't see a whole lot of farming happening right now. So like, what does this land do for us, if that makes sense from an ecological standpoint?
Oh yeah, so the actual farmland is kind of just out of where we are, so just beyond these trees. But in another way, what this does is it connects land at Lake Ontario with land to the north around this landform called the Oak Ridges Moraine. It's this rocky ridge that a lot of rivers start on. They feed into our water supply, and they also, produce creeks like this. And so this is actually a really important corridor for wildlife as well, because it's one of those last remaining habitat connections between those two really important places.
So for wildlife and in a way for water filtration, like, am I understanding you?
Yeah, absolutely. Creeks like this and like having natural places makes the water cleaner. Wetlands in particular around here naturally filter the water that runs through. And also, waterways like this and the green space around them are really important for making sure this area doesn't flood, which is something that not a lot of people know.
So how does that work exactly?
So wetlands act like sponges. When water falls, wetlands are able to naturally absorb that excess drain, right? Whereas if you imagine rain falling on concrete, on pavement, in cities, it just collects, right? It stays on the surface.
Right. Wetlands
allow it to naturally go into the ground and protects, surrounding property and humans and life.
They say build, build, build because a lot of people want to see building happen, right? They need homes. And so what would you say to someone who says, look, I understand what you're saying. This is a relatively small piece of land, though, in the grand scale of things, certainly compared to the rest of the Greenbelt. And we need homes. So if we can stick a few thousand homes here, maybe that's worth the trade.
We're in Pickering right now. Pickering has thousands of acres of land already allocated for development. They've planned $1 billion casino there, tons of high rises, low density housing, and so forth. That hasn't even started. It's still stuck in limbo. So the big question then is, why aren't we developing that land first before even thinking about, cutting down these trees and paving over this creek and this farmland? Because once you pave over this kind of natural land, you can't get it back.
Now, this is a good time to jump in and mention something. Anytime Ontario's Premier, Doug Ford, has been asked about this big flip-flop, protecting versus developing the Greenbelt, his government's position has always been that its priority is to solve the housing crisis and to build as many homes as quickly as possible, which kind of makes me wonder, how hard is it to get homes built, right? Like, the Greenbelt isn't the only place we can build. So what's the holdup generally? Well, one reason is urban planning just takes a long time, right? I mean, we can see that this building is under construction now, but just to get to that point, a developer would have to go through many different layers of approvals. You know, we can talk about zoning bylaws as an example. That can be one of the biggest hurdles that a developer has to overcome. So if you look at this land use map of Toronto, all of the yellow, that's zoned neighborhoods. So if a developer wants to come in and build something with 4 or more units, like an apartment building, they have to apply for a special rezoning permit. And up until very recently, only single-family homes could be built there. Governments often require studies and community consultations. There are design guidelines that cover everything from the types of materials you can use in a project like this to the size of the shadow that the building casts. Bottom line, there are a lot of hoops to jump through, and it could take years to get through them all. Now, another reason housing is so difficult to build is the cost involved. So, you know, there's the physical cost, right? Things like lumber, reinforced steel, rebar, they all went up during the pandemic. There's also the cost of labor. So, according to Stats Canada, there's a shortage of skilled workers last year. But then there are the soft costs, right? So now we're getting into the things that I mentioned before, like permits, approvals, studies, consults. They can all be really expensive. And you know, one housing expert that we spoke to said that the cost can run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars per unit, which means that, you know, small developers or even regular homeowners who are looking to just build something simple like laneway housing, that can get really pricey. And by the time they realize it, the whole project could be scrapped before shovels even hit the dirt. Then there's just the simple fact that for a lot of people who already own their homes, change can be hard. I mean, nobody wants to see their peaceful neighborhood of single-family homes transformed into a jungle of dense megastructures. And let me show you something. So this church over here, there's a proposal to convert this into 100 units of affordable housing. Most of them would go in this, an 11-story tower. But some neighbors are concerned about that tower looming over their homes, and there's even a concern about the availability of parking, and someone has helpfully underlined that for us. 100 residents is 56 cars, right? Where do all those cars go? Now, the city planner on this project told CBC back in July that the Scarborough Community Council will be reviewing plans early this year, and then things open up to community consultations. But people who oppose the project, they can file an appeal with the Ontario Land Tribunal. It only costs $400, and no construction is allowed to happen until that appeals process is settled. All to say that that can take months, even years. Okay, you get the idea. We're going to take a commercial break, then we're going to get back on our road trip. Welcome back to About That. We are indeed back in the van right now with Emma and Fatima, and we're heading to one more place.
Yep.
This is a place called Block 41, is that right?
That's right. We are in Vaughan, and we're heading to a spot where a whole bunch of land development issues in Ontario collide head-on in like a kind of unassuming field just outside of the city.
Okay, so what do you mean, like land development issues colliding head-on?
This is the last green space available in this region that is within the boundaries of York Region. And that's really important to understand because as you develop cities, you lose green space, right? Unless you actually actively design parks to be embedded within the housing and development that you're creating. This one is all green.
And do I have this right that the question of who wants to develop the land in this area, that has become sort of a central part of the story?
Yep.
Absolutely.
The value of this public investment is today worth billions of dollars. Why is the minister betraying the public's trust by removing these farmland protections and giving away this immensely valuable public investment to powerful land speculators like the De Gasperis family?
So who owns the land has become like a huge focus of public attention lately. One of the developers who owns the land that we are about to visit is Silvio de Gasperis of TAC. He's one of the big beneficiaries of the Greenbelt land swap, and he's also someone with long ties to the party.
So this is it, guys.
Block 41.
Block 41. And so funny enough, I mean, that's this, right?
Yeah.
Like right here.
Right here. This whole thing, all of that.
And right on the other side of the road is just Vaughan.
Just Vaughan. Yeah. Normal countryside in Vaughan.
And so what is it about like this particular plot of land and in terms of how it's changed hands over the last little while that has particularly raised some eyebrows?
Yeah, Block 41 has been the center of more than a few development battles over the years, but most recently it's caught some attention because this piece of land right here has a bit of greenbelt on it, and it was actually bought last year for $50 million. What was really interesting about it was how much it sold for and when it was sold. So this land right now, you can see it's got some green stuff on it. Some of it was developable, and it's right next to land that this developer already owns. So you can see why they might buy it.
Right.
But it's also a lot of money to spend on land that has greenbelt on it.
Right, which is undevelopable, right?
Exactly. So chunks of this, yes, you could build on, but chunks of it you couldn't. And so to pay $50 million for something so constrained, something that had been protected for over 15 years, it was an interesting transaction, for sure.
Interesting because a year after they bought it came the announcement that, hey, now you can develop on this land.
Exactly. And they're not the only developers to make a recent purchase of Greenbelt land that is now open for development.
There are others.
There are others. One case that we focused on was up in King City. A developer paid $80 million for a chunk of entirely Greenbelt land. And he bought it 6 weeks before Doug Ford announced that they would be opening up a parcel that included that plot.
And $80 million, was that a lot of money compared to what the land was actually worth at the time?
The people that we spoke to said, yeah, that it seemed unusual. For land that could really only be used for farming.
Are these kinds of transactions, though, are they common? I mean, so 6 weeks ago, before the announcement rather, was when that piece of land was sold. How many times had it been bought and sold prior to that moment?
That piece of land hadn't been bought and sold since the 2000s.
So almost 2 decades go by, stays in one sort of party's hands. 6 weeks before Doug Ford makes the announcement that this part of the Greenbelt could be developed on, it changes hands.
Yeah. And you can understand why some people would raise eyebrows at that, right?
Right.
Now, this kind of thing where developers buy up land, kind of speculating that one day it will be developable, that happens all the time. We talked to one developer in Hamilton who bought a bit of Greenbelt land in the last 4 years because he thought that it shouldn't be in there, that it's already on the edge, it's already surrounded by development, and whoever put it in made a mistake. And so he was making a big bet that, you know, someday someone would see the common sense in that, and that bet is now paying off. But I think especially with some of the timing, it's caused people to ask whether anyone knew in advance.
Can you definitively say that you and no one associated with your government gave any advance notice, either directly to the developers or through any kind of intermediaries, about this plan?
Yeah, I can confirm that, but again, we had very strict criterias. That has to be close to an existing development, and we're just happy that we're going to hold these people accountable to start building attainable and affordable homes.
What is interesting is that time and again, there are certain plots of land that keep coming up in the political conversation that developers especially want to be developed. And we're standing next to one of them, right? Block 41 has been at the center of York Region's development discourse. The developer that owns this land has urged council to let them develop it. And it's seemingly innocent, right? They're saying just rezone it. Right now, it's agricultural land mostly. Rezone it so that it's rural. What that means is that the developer can develop pockets of it, build a warehouse here and there, build a community center, maybe a campground. All those things sound okay. But what kind of precedent does that set, right? If a government can, with a flick of a finger, rezone a land based on a developer's request, what does that mean for all the other parcels of land?
Because as you've said, the Greenbelt was always meant to be protected in perpetuity.
Forever and ever and ever. But at the end of the day, the Ford government has said to us as well, time and time again, that this is to help Ontarians. Doug Ford says that every Ontarian has a dream to have a white picket fence. That's what he said when he announced Bill 23. I have read Bill 23 a million times, so have countless others, and the conclusion they come to is that, but it won't. It won't give Ontarians the white picket fence. And if it won't do that, you have to wonder, so who is the Ford government listening to? Who is actually sitting around the table and making these decisions, and why? And that lack of transparency, that lack of consultation, Indigenous communities say they haven't been consulted, conservation authorities say they haven't been consulted, Ontarians say they haven't been consulted. So who is the Ford government listening to, and how did they make this decision? And until we know that, you can't help but wonder, was this a democratic decision that was made in the best interest of the people of Ontario? And will this actually help solve the housing problem that they so need solved immediately?
Fatima, Emma, you have given us an awful lot to think about over the course of the day. Thank you so much for being our guides through all of this. It's been wonderfully insightful.
Lovely to spend the day with you in the OG.
The OG. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will be back with a final thought after this. Hey, welcome back. I hope you found this journey informative. And, I will say, this is not a simple problem to solve, right? This is the struggle we're facing, where we have two very competing, conflicting interests. I mean, on the one hand, yes, we need to build homes for people to live in and to thrive, right? But we also want to do it without ruining the land that so many of us rely on to succeed and to stay healthy. I mean, these are both important things, right? No one disputes that we need to build more homes. No one disputes that there is land that we ought to protect. But it's in weighing the individual parcels against each other where things really start to get complicated. And beyond that, when you start throwing in things like money and power and politics, that's when you really get a tangled web in front of you, where it becomes difficult to have a good faith conversation with other people, deciding, okay, what are the merits of plan A versus plan B? All to say that this is not a simple problem to solve, but boy, these are the decisions that are going to shape not the city that we live in for the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, but for the next hundreds of years. Hey, thanks for joining us here on About That. I'm Andrew Chang. Take care.